The odd
Yeah.
thing, though, is, and you might have experienced this in school, is that pretty much all architects in school are taught to think about their projects as a narrative, and that we're storytellers. This is something
Mm-hmm.
that architects say. We're storytellers, but we use architecture and space and whatever to do
Mm-hmm.
it. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why there's a disconnect, therefore, between,
Yeah.
them not maybe being the greatest at communicating their work verbally or in a written language.
Mm. Yeah. So that might be, I don't remember being taught anything about storytelling or narrative, but I do
Ah,
remember that the presentation was the biggest thing, right? And that the desk crit, I mean, just listening to it was like, well, we weren't taught that, but actually we were absolutely taught that through the way in which we were assessed and evaluated, which was the desk crit, which is
mm-hmm.
like, look at my project, here's what I'm doing. And then of course the final presentation, the juried review, which is I still think when it's well executed is a really, really great pedagogical method, right? Where you're taught to stand up and you present for 5 minutes. And, um, but I think that part of the disconnect is a sort of lack of valuing language and writing as its own very separate skill set in architecture school. And so
Mm,
to sort of distill my critique is that architects tend to, maybe more than other industries, maybe less. It's sort of the industry that I know the most about. Really perpetuate this mythology that architecture is incredibly important and it's incredibly hard. And going back to my sophomore studio project, not that many people can do it. And if you can do it, you low key are a genius. I mean, that I think is
yeah.
really, really taught, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like, we're not the bankers, we're not the hedge fund managers, we're not like whatever, we're architects. We are shaping the world. And so there's this kind of like ego. And what I've observed is that the ego kind of translates into assuming a facility with everything else. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that the sort of underlying belief is like, if you're good enough to be an architect, you could probably also do everything else. You just don't have time,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you had time, you definitely could. I run into this with my clients too. They're like, well, the reason I can't do my own PR is I don't have time. And I'm like, no, the reason is you don't know how to do PR, you know? Um, they
Excuse
say, well,
me.
like, or they say, I could write this book, but I don't have time. And I'm like, writing books is really hard.
Yeah.
I've now written 3 books. It's really hard. I went to a lot of school to learn how to be a better book writer. And so I think that like one of the more, yeah, it's like this kind of pernicious, like lumping in of like, if I can think about architecture and even I can, if you can think in a way that is narrative, where you're able to think about storytelling, which I believe that architects are trained to do. Like, I absolutely agree with your premise. I think there's still this missing piece of
Mm.
like, to be really good at writing, it's, you really have to either be good at it or practice or read a lot or do things that a lot of architects don't have time or interest to do. Um, and so part of what I'm always trying to say is like, writing is not the process of transcribing your thoughts, right?
Mm.
It's not like, oh, I have a lot of really good thoughts and I can give really good presentations, therefore I'm a really good writer. Like, writing is a very different, arcane, complicated, infuriating, exhilarating process.